download this file and open it up. Um, and then I want you to initially just kind of look around, check out what's going on here. Instead of working with just one artboard, we have four. So in Illustrator, you can make more than one. So that's the first thing I want to point out. Second thing I want to point out is this layers panel. So if you don't see this, you should just have some tabs here. Typically, our Illustrator is set up to see the Properties tab. We're going to go ahead and click on Layers, and that's going to show you some of these layers. We're going to continue to talk more about layers over the next couple projects, but right now what I want to show you is that there's these little eyeballs next to here, so we can just toggle these on and off, and we can hide what's on that layer, and we can bring it back. The other thing we can do with layers is there's currently an empty space here, but you can click on it and create a lock, and now you can't select those things that are on that layer. We can create new layers, we can reorder them. Those are things we'll talk about later, but right now I just want you to start getting used to the concept of working with layers. In the future we'll discuss why they're important and how to take advantage of the features. Alright, so right now what I want you to look at is just that I've created some stuff on the left artboards, and on the right I've given you some space to practice some things. So the first thing we're going to look at is the art brush. There's a couple different types of brushes, and that's what we're going to focus on, but first we're going to look at the art brush. So one other thing I want us to do before you get started is go to Window, Brushes. It should bring up this panel. I'm going to go ahead and just snap this into the side here and let it go. That way I have quick access to it and I can grab it whenever I need it. In Illustrator, we can use these brushes. There are some pre-made brushes for us, but we can also make custom brushes. And so the brush tool is near the top. The keyboard shortcut for this is the letter B. We can take that and just click and drag, and you can make all kinds of shapes. There's different settings for your brush. To access the settings, you can just double click it, and it brings up this little options window. Really, this will be the only thing that you play with, so if you want it to be more accurate to your hand and what you do, you'll have less fidelity. If I want it to automatically kind of smooth things out, I would want it to be more smooth. And you see how that's a little bit cleaner of a line. So you just got to find that balance. Typically, right in the middle is pretty good. And that's what we're going to start with. So just use your brush tool, draw a few things just to get you started. And then I want you to come over to your brushes. Notice how there's one that's already kind of selected by default, but go ahead, click on a few of the others and see what happens. Now these are going to work just like along with our stroke panel. Alright, so we can increase the width of this by increasing our stroke, and we can change the color of it by changing the color of our stroke. So you can get really creative with this. In your brush panel in the bottom left, you have a library. You can click that. And there's all these different types of brushes that are pre-made for you to use. So go ahead, just select one of them and just pause the video, practice, try a few of these out and experiment and just see what's capable. And then when you're done trying to play around a little bit, restart the video, and I'm going to show you how to make some custom brushes. Okay, so now what we're going to do is I'm going to show you how to make our own brushes. Because one of the reasons why we would want to do that, because the brush panel doesn't have everything that we would want. So for example, we could make our own brush and do like this tapered effect. Right, this is very common. We could use that to do things. You can see these little swirls in here. You know, you get that nice effect, this little detail here. So those are some of the things we could do if we know how to make our own brush. And we can also take it to another level. We can create little objects and turn those into brushes, and then use our brush tool to do that as well. So we're going to start off basic. We're going to look at this one first. And again, just off into the work area. You can do this on your own. And so we're going to take our circle. We're going to make a perfect circle. And I'm going to fill it with black. And with this, I'm also going to fill this with black, and then I'm going to remove the stroke color. And now I just want to switch to my direct selection tool. I'm going to select one of these anchor points. I do that just by clicking and letting go on that. And then I'm going to drag this out to the right. I'm going to drag it pretty far. All right, now I'm almost there. Notice, see how this has a pointed tip to it? And this is still rounded. I want to convert that from a rounded anchor point to a corner anchor point. So if you just continue to keep that selected, in the properties panel we see this convert option, and so I can just select this one and it's going to convert that to a corner. Alright, from here I can just kind of resize this a little bit, tweak it as I need. And there we go. Alright, so brushes are typically going to be made in black, and after you make it, you're going to want to keep the original brush somewhere off to the side so you don't accidentally delete it. So to make it, we need to have the brushes panel open, and then we just click it and drag it right in. We get this menu that pops up. We're going to make an art brush. So select that option and click OK. And we have some different options here. You could give this a name if you wanted to, if you start creating, multiple brushes. And what this window is showing you, this little arrow here, is really what you want to pay attention to for right now. It's showing you where the point of the arrow is when you click and start dragging the wide end of this brush. Okay, this is where it's gonna start, and then it's gonna taper, and that's where it's gonna end. So if I click and drag, it's going to be fatter where I start, and then it's going to taper off wherever I end. Alright, if we want to be able to change the color of this brush later on, we want to change this to tints, and then click OK. So now we can take our brush tool and we can try drawing something and apply our brush to it. You can change the width of this, and now we should also be able to change the color of this as well. So go ahead and play around with that. You can pause the video, try to do a few things, and then we'll pick up. So for sake of time, what I want you to do is just select this and make a copy of it, drag it off into our work area. And this is an example of a more complex brush. This is made with just simple shapes. You know how to do all of this. These are just circles that I manipulated with the direct selection tool. And again, we have this shape, I made that just like up here. And then I just kind of, for the stems of each leaf, just did little rectangles. All right, so that's all that is. It's nothing complicated. We're going to take this and turn it into a brush. So just click it, drag it into our brush panel. And again, we're going to select our brush, click OK. And this one, again, we don't necessarily want to change the color of this later. If you want to change this to tints, that's fine. I'm also going to select this option, scale proportionally. So that way as we draw our line, it will expand to kind of fit it a little bit better. So once you start playing around with it, you'll see. So go ahead, click OK. And I should mention this too, if you ever want to make a change to a brush, in your brushes panel, you just double click it, and then you can make any changes that you need. All right, so now that we have that made, we can just start drawing with it. All right, so go ahead, try that out. You can try making a brush with this other object that I've given you. And let's see what you can do. Maybe you can come up with something fun. Maybe you want to recreate a wreath. Maybe you want to create a brush all your own, but try to draw something that's cohesive. Don't spend more than 5 or 10 minutes. Again, this is just practice, so try it out, see what you think. Okay, so the next type of brush that we're going to make is a scatter brush. And in this example, we took a circle, and if we paint with it, you can see how it just spreads and scatters it out random. Randomness is good for things like this. If we're trying to create stars, if we're trying to make snowflakes, abstract art, so that would be a good reason for us to use the scatter brush. So that's what we're going to make first, and then we're going to follow it up with adding texture. So we can use brushes to apply texture. So that's what we're going to look at next, and let's start with this top one. So again, we can just come over here. You can just make a simple circle and just fill it with black. I'm going to open up our brushes panel. You might need to zoom in a little bit to grab your circle and drag it in. And this time we're going to select scatter brush. And we have some options here as far as what we want to randomize with this. So we can click the drop down and choose select. So we have two options here, two different sliders. So if I move this first slider all the way to the left, what this is telling us is that it's telling the program to accept randomness from 10% of its original width all the way up to 100%. So this would make it 10% of its original size, which would make it smaller, up to 100%. So we'd get randomness in between those two values. And again, this is just, there's no science to this. It's trial and error. Spacing. Okay, spacing is how far apart is each instance of the brush going to be. Scatter is if we were to draw a straight line, okay, how above or below that line would the randomness be of each instance. And then rotation, we can randomize to If we want this to be able to rotate in any direction possible, we would put these both, to the left and to the right. Now, this being a circle, it's not going to make much of a difference. We won't notice. But for other things, you might want to know that. And again, if we want to change the color of this later down the road, we would change this to tints. And then we click OK. So again, we want to get in the habit of just putting these things off to the side, somewhere where we won't accidentally go over it. And typically, you can put this into the gray area, these brushes, so that way it's not in your final art piece. So now if we switch to our brush tool and we brush with this, you can see the randomness. And again, you can make bubbles with this. You can make a lot of cool things with a scatter brush. And just to get an idea of some of those control panels, why don't you go ahead, select a brush that you just made and double click on the brush so that way we can make some changes. And you want this little preview box checked off, and as we make changes, you can see how it's going to affect this line. And so go ahead, play around with the controls a little bit, just see what happens. Until you get a good feel of it, you'll click OK. It'll ask you if you want to apply this to current strokes or just leave the current strokes alone and only apply this to future brush strokes. So depending on your situation, click the one that is appropriate. Alright, now I'm going to show you how to make some texture. So over the next couple projects, we'll be talking about texture and different things that we can do and just make things look a little less flat. In this case, again, all this is very small shapes that have been grouped together. You could create this using rectangles. You can make this with squares, rounded rectangles. There's a lot of different ways you can make this. So for now, you can just reuse this. And again, we're just going to click and drag it right in here. We're going to turn this into a scatter brush. It will bring up the scatter brush options window. And what we want to do, again, we're going to turn all these random. You can adjust yours if you want to similar to be like mine. Again, for everyone, it's going to be a little different. You're going to try different things out, and typically with the scatter brush, it's very common to have to come back and make changes after you get at least one brush down, and so that way you can kind of see the changes as you make it. But here's how I set mine up, at least initially, and you can do the same if you want. So when we brush with this, you can go ahead, see what it does. You can change the colors of this. And in art, this is sometimes called a stipple brush, if you remember that. And so what I did in some of these other examples, we can look at the tree. And I just made a flat shape, and you can pick maybe a green, and then I took our texture brush here and then I just changed the color to this just a bit to make it stand out, and you could just kind of layer your brush on there. Again, another thing that you can do is change the stroke of each one of these to kind of fit. All right. With the texture, you'll notice that it doesn't quite stay on there inside the shape. So that's going to be in our next video. What we're going to look at is something called a mask, and that's what we're going to address in the mask. But for this, I want to keep it focused on brushes. All right, so this is a good introduction into brushes, and go ahead, play around with some stuff, create whatever you want, and take a screenshot of this, and you're going to upload this into the guided activity.